here is going to be recorded both to post later to our website, and it will also be broadcast live on Facebook, so you can go and see the re-recording at any point here that is convenient for you. Okay. So we're going to give it a couple of more minutes here. We'll give it to 6:35. We had in excess of 20 people that were signed up tonight, plus any folks that will be viewing us here on Facebook. And I know a lot of folks are already starting to join in and watch. So we'll be giving it a couple more minutes here before we dive into the content. We want to make sure that we are giving ourselves an adequate amount of time, but I'm going to be kind of quick as we move through this tonight because there is so much content to go through. I want to make sure that we're using our time effectively, because there is a lot of science that we're going to talk about. There is a lot of things that are very specific to what your children's challenges are. I have posted a poll with just a couple of simple questions. So I would encourage you to make sure that you fill out the poll so that we can know kind of what everyone is coming here for and how we can help. And also on here, there is on your screen at the bottom, there's a chat box. So if you have any specific questions that do pop up during the course of the webinar, don't hesitate to put those in your chat box. And time permitting, I will get to those at the end. And this way here, we can make sure that we are trying to get as much information to you as possible, things that we directly go through tonight. And if there's anything that is not addressed that you'd like more information about, feel free to contact me right through here via the chat box. Or if you're on Facebook, our Facebook address is facebook.com/Elite Health and Wellness, all written out. So you can also go to our website, which is elitehealthandwellness.net. And that is also all written out. So we've got a lot of folks who can communicate with us right through there. And we will also have a page where this will be posted directly onto the website once we are finished here tonight. So at 6:33, we're going to give it a couple of more minutes here before we start digging into the content. And hopefully here we will be able to get everyone logged on before 6:35. And I'm going to try and be done here by hopefully between 7:30 and 8 o'clock. As I mentioned, there's quite a bit of content to go through. So I will move as quickly as I possibly can to try and have respect for your time. Okay. Going to give it one more minute here, and then we're going to go ahead and get started. All right. Okay, almost 6:35. All right, so it is 6:35, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So first and foremost, my name is Dr. Scott Haggerty, and tonight's presentation is called The Perfect Storm. And I'm going to dig very deeply into this whole concept of neurodevelopmental disorders, because if you're here and you're watching this video, then obviously it's close to your heart. And so we have a couple of goals that we want to establish here tonight. Number one, we want to talk about why. Why are so many kids being afflicted by neurodevelopmental disorders today? And second is, what can we do about it? So as we go through tonight, like I said, I'm going to move at a pretty good clip here, trying to go through as much information as I can. I am going to flip here in a moment. I'm going to share my screen with you so that you can get the information here. And again, on the replay, you also have the information that we're going to go through, both the science and the other information that we're going to talk about, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here in just one second. And we are going to flip this onto slideshow view so you can watch it right here from the current slide. All right, so first and foremost, my name is, again, Dr. Scott Haggerty. I am a proud husband and daddy. I graduated with my bachelor's in science from Logan University out in Chesterfield, Missouri. I have a Doctor of Chiropractic, which I also received from Logan College of Chiropractic, also in beautiful Chesterfield, Missouri. I have a master's degree in sports science and rehab, and I am a proud member of Pediatrics. And for those of you who have not heard of Pediatrics, it is where all of the docs who you hear doing the Perfect Storm conversations that we're having tonight, we were all trained through this organization. It's a coalition of pediatric chiropractors that are specially and very specifically trained to work with kids that have these types of struggles. I have a continuing education certification in chiropractic nutrition specialist. I am also Webster certified for pregnancy care. And not listed on here, but also relevant, I am a proud member of the International Chiropractic Pediatric Association, which is a training and research organization that is specifically devoted to working with children and parents. And we get a lot of our training on working with kids, for well kids to kids that are dealing with health challenges like asthma and autism and sensory processing issues directly through them. And then Pediatrics enhanced the training so that we were able to really target in and get amazing results with kids with neurodevelopmental disorders that many other professions are not able to obtain. So for those of you who are on here, this is my why. The hottie there on the left side of the screen, that is my gorgeous wife, smoking hot Dr. Lena Haggerty. She is my driving force and my motivation behind everything that I do, along with those two little munchkins there, my wonderful children. The little guy there, that's my son Elijah. He's now 4, and he's a handful. And for those of you who've seen my most recent video, he's into trouble a lot, but he's a great little boy. That pretty little girl right there is my daughter Olivia. So they are 4 and 6. And for those of you who have children that are dealing with neurodevelopmental disorders, I will tell you this. As a proud daddy and as a proud chiropractor, kids like my kids are the reason that I get out of bed, because I love helping kids who have challenges. My ultimate mission and the mission of our practice is to not just help kids to get better and improve their quality of life, but to also get in front of this thing that we call the perfect storm. And so one of our things that we talk about here in our practice all the time is the concept of creating storm chasers. And I want to teach every mom and dad what can be done to try and prevent the perfect storm from brewing so that we can have more healthy kids instead of more sick kids. Unfortunately, the trend is going in the opposite direction right now. But I have the pleasure of being the proud daddy of 2 very amazing children. My daughter, Olivia, had a perfect storm start. And she had a more complicated birth than what we were expecting to have. We tried to do a natural delivery, and unfortunately, things didn't work that way. And this is how many of you may have experienced it. My little girl was a 33-hour labor. My wife pushed and pushed and pushed, and my little girl would not transition. And she ended up having to do the thing that she didn't want to do, which is have an epidural and the use of Pitocin. My daughter was oblique in my wife's pelvis, which made her transitioning through the birth canal very difficult. Thank God we were able to go and have a vaginal delivery, which is what we ultimately wanted. But knowing what we know now, it caused my daughter a number of challenges, especially early in life, with colic and constipation, hypersensitivity. She needed to be held and rocked and walked constantly. After we graduated from chiropractic school, we moved into my parents' house where we're getting our practice opened up for a few months. And I would venture to say I pretty much walked a trail through their upstairs and their living room, rocking her and shushing her for hours, sometimes per night, because she needed sensory input to calm her down so that she would be able to go to sleep or stay asleep. So she was really and truly a perfect storm child who had hyper-emotional problems. I could go on forever about this, but we're blessed now that we know what we know, because we're able to go and help her to function optimally. Now she's a little girl who's rarely, if ever, sick, top of her class, does wonderful things in school, brilliant, beautiful, smart, creative, because her brain is communicating and working the way that God intended it to. So let's start digging into the material here, and I want to start talking about perception, because perception completely is everything. Many of you have probably wondered about many of the things we're going to talk about tonight. Just maybe you haven't been looking in quite the right place. So let's go and set the stage here.
This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make? Go!
So what did everybody get? More importantly, did you see the moonwalking bear? Here, let's watch it again.
The answer is 13. But did you see the moonwalking bear?
Keep watching. Coming in from the left side of the screen right now, in center. Can you see him? There he is. Doing a little breakdancing while he's in the center. So this quote is fantastic. It's easy to miss what you're not looking for. Totally correct. That, unfortunately, is where we've gotten to at this point. We have a culture in which kids are sicker than what they've ever been. But we have this problem where there's a disconnect. Moms and dads have a hunch as to what might be going on, but in so many ways now we don't know where to look. And we're going to talk about why this is and what this is, because where you're looking really matters, okay? So we're going to set the stage here. We have 2 rules tonight. So the first rule is we don't call kids names. Or do we? Because I'm pretty sure that every single day I see kids with this entire list coming into my office, more than we've ever seen ever. We have kids that are being diagnosed daily with autism, ADHD, sensory processing disorder, PDD-NOS, Asperger's, oppositional defiance, obsessive compulsive, anxiety, bipolar, allergies, and asthma. It's crazy. Everywhere you look, there's kids that are being diagnosed with conditions that really and truly, if you're in my age group, I'm 41, you never heard of this stuff when I was a kid. But now it's everywhere. And of course, what is every single one of these kids getting these days? Well, of course, the fix for this must be what? Don't do drugs, right? Wrong. Because now every time you turn around, kids are being prescribed medicines to change the way their nervous system works to try and make them function better in life. And so every day we look around, we see kids that are being given Ritalin, Strattera, Prozac, Concerta, Adderall, Focalin, Zoloft, Klonopin, Abilify, phenobarbital, and Keppra. It's alphabet soup of meds that are being prescribed, but do they really help? I have parents every single day saying, I hate my kid the way they act when they're on their Adderall and their Ritalin. It changes them. They don't like the way they feel. They don't feel like themselves. Well, of course, these things are messing with their brains, changing the way they function. But think about this. They are being proposed as a solution to a problem, but when there's solutions out there that are oftentimes more effective than these, then who doesn't want you to know about these? Of course, all of you are saying to yourselves, right? The people who make the drugs. And that's true, because the goal is to try and help the children to function better in school by altering the way their brains work, but it's masking the problem, right? Once you understand what the problem is and where it starts, then it gives you a different way to approach these issues altogether. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight, is why these kids are having these issues, how they started down this road, and how to help them to have a much better quality of life than what they are today. So this isn't an autism talk, but I want to bring a couple of things to your attention. So autism is escalating, and it's a significant thing that we need to think about. In March of 2014, the CDC issued a rate of autism of 1 in 68. 1 in 42 boys, 1 in 189 girls. That's a scary number by itself. What you need to understand is that number is not just scary, it's escalating. And in the next slide, we're going to talk about why that's scary. because Dr. Rosenoff here explains that it may be more like 1 in 45.
A new study out today told us that autism affects 1 in 45 children. This number does not replace the CDC's official estimate of 1 in 68. The 1 in 45 is based off a parent-reported survey that in just 1 year's time saw a doubling in autism prevalence. The reason was due to the methods of the research, and for that reason, we're going to stick with the 1 in 68 for now. This study is another piece of evidence suggesting that 1 in 68 is actually an underestimate of the true autism prevalence in the US. 1 in 45 in this study and 1 in 50 was the number from a previous study, are showing us that maybe the number is actually closer to 2% of the population here in the US. In South Korea, we saw an even higher number, 1 in 38. All in all, we're underestimating the prevalence of autism here in the US.
So that's a very sobering conversation that Dr. Rosenoff just had there. And so let's dig a little bit deeper into the change rate here, because this is important to understand. So in 1975, the diagnosis rate was 1 in 5,000. 85, 2,500, 1 in 2,500, 95, 1 in 500. Skip ahead, 2006, 1 in 110, 2008, 1 in 88, 2010, 1 in 68, 2014, 1 in 45. Why? Is it better diagnosis? Now, don't get me wrong, there has been some changes in what they call the inclusion criteria that have brought more children under the spectrum. But ladies and gentlemen, I will tell you that there is no way that random chance has caused, or even improved diagnosis has caused this rate to go from 1 in 5,000 the year that I was born, 1975, to 1 in 45 children right now. And so you need to understand that when you look at numbers that are changing like this isn't something that happens without something that is physically influencing the way these children are developing. And so you can't take diagnostics, refine them, and get this kind of a number. And let's even step further back, right? Ladies and gentlemen, if this were true, and we were looking at a rate of 1 in 45 back 40 years ago, you would have to look around and you would realize that if 1 in 45 adults were autistic, on every street corner in America, there would be houses and nursing homes that are built to house the aging adult autistic population for the rest of their life to try and help them with function and life care. It's a physical impossibility that we've reached this without there being things that have changed. So this is a big hot button topic. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, but you need to understand that it's an external influence. Many people think that it's vaccines. It may be. We need to talk about that there are definitely things that are predisposing kids to going down that road. So do we have a swine flu pandemic? Well, I would say probably that's the least of our concerns, given the fact that we've got an asthma rate of 1 in 10 kids, which results in $50 billion in costs, or $3,300 per year per person with it. We have 1 in 9 kids, 1 in 12 boys being diagnosed with ADHD. And the most common drug prescribed is in the same class as cocaine. We have 1 in 5 children being diagnosed with some form of mental illness. That's scary, beyond scary. Because I will tell you this, when I was a kid, what I remember is that the kid who was the sick kid, the one who had the asthma, the one who had all the allergies, the one who had all the problems, was usually the same kid, right? The one kid in the class who was the unhealthy kid. Most of you who are around my age or a little bit younger probably can remember this. Now, every single time you turn around, there is a kid who's coming in that's being labeled with something. And every school now has accommodations that are being made because kids have nut allergies, they've got sensitivities to gluten. My daughter's school does not even allow nuts of any sort into the school for fear of nut allergy. But every child now is developing these types of issues. So there's a million things that have changed, up to and including the way their brains and their nervous systems are connecting. And so let's talk about what this perfect storm is. There's 3 things that we need to know about. So our bodies are primarily influenced by thoughts, traumas, and toxins, right? 3 T's to try and keep it simple for you to remember. So the first T here being thoughts, right? That's emotional stressors. Now, think about your life. Think about what everything is going on in your world, right? We may not have bad things necessarily going on, but we have a pace. We are on the go from the minute that we wake up until the minute that we go to the bed, just about every day, right? Your kids are involved in things, your family has responsibilities, we've got stuff that's on our plate, plus a busy work schedule, plus sports. All that stuff is stress. And then you take into account that maybe there's financial stress, maybe the home life isn't perfectly happy, maybe there's bullying happening at school, all emotional stressors. Chemical stress, things that we're being exposed to. Moms and dads, oh my gosh, this is an epidemic. We're going to dig into this in a moment. And physical stress, traumas. All of these things here we are seeing in ways that we've never seen them before. And let's dig deeper. So physical stress, let's define this. Many, many, many times we find that physical stress starts even as early as in utero because of positioning. Breech positions, a baby being stuck in, whether it's a frank breech, transverse breech, oblique in the pelvis. If the pelvis is not working the way that it should, moving for baby, if the uterus is tight, baby's not able to move, that causes baby to be in a malpositioning. That can lead to issues with the way they have neurological development even before they enter the world. And then there's birth process. And of course, birth trauma is a significantly underreported, underregarded portion of this equation. So when a baby enters the world, we see many, many times babies are being born using forceps, vacuum extractors, having their cords wrapped around their neck, C-sections, especially emergency C-sections, we're seeing in unbelievable levels. And of course, there's the combination, C-section with forceps and vacuum extraction. These things happen all the time. Childhood falls, which, think about the average kid, right? Most kids fall an average of 10,000 times before they're stable on their feet, right? From the time they start walking, give or take a year, to around 4 years old. The Back to Sleep program, and well-intentioned, right? I mean, the Back to Sleep program's design was to reduce SIDS. Unfortunately, it is not a functional position for children to sleep because babies were developed to sleep in a fetal position. It's comfortable for them. They're biologically designed for it. When you constrain babies by putting them into the swaddle position, it is unnatural for them, and that actually creates stress for them, but also doesn't allow them the freedom of movement they're supposed to have, so they don't get this thing called proprioception, which we'll talk about later. Babies are in car seats more than ever. Baby Bjorns that put them up under gravity when they're not supposed to be. Bouncy seats, you name it. So I'll give you a demonstration. Many of us have seen things like this and don't think about it, but let's put this in the new context of thinking about what our kids go through every day. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry I had to stop it. I've seen enough. When I was a kid, I would have been laughing hysterically because I would have thought it was so funny. But as a pediatric chiropractor, I see these things and I know the damage that it's doing to the kids. I also know what the long-term side effects of these things are to their nervous system, and it makes it tough to watch. But this is what our kids are going through every single day. And it's a compounding factor, right? Because the brain actually learns what pain is, and it can get really good at knowing that. We'll talk about this concept later on down the road. So let's talk about this next concept of chemical stress. And so this is one I could spend probably the rest of the evening talking about, but we're not going to. This is a big topic, but you need to understand this is everywhere. We have levels of chemical stress we've never seen before in the history of mankind. In our foods, there are preservatives and pesticides like crazy, right? You've got foods that are being sprayed over with glyphosates and all these different chemicals that are causing irritation to our systems and can potentially cause gene defects, all kinds of stuff. Sugar grains, dairy-based diets, environmental chemicals are everywhere. We've got household cleaners, detergents. Of course, there's vaccines with the adjuvants that are geared towards stimulating an immune reaction. Things like mercury, aluminum, sorbitol, and much more. Quick side note on this topic. This is something I'm asked about a lot, and I'm not going to take a stance on here for us to have a conversation about. But one of the things that you want to think about is, this mercury conversation is a big one to understand. Moms, when you were pregnant, I'm going to venture to say that you were told that you should not ingest tuna for the primary reason of not getting too much mercury in your diet, right? How does it change to give injectable mercury in the form of a vaccine to a baby that does not even have an intact blood-brain barrier? For those of you who don't know what a blood-brain barrier is, it is the security net between the blood and the nervous system that protects it. It becomes like a filter, blocks out things selectively so that things like mercury, aluminum, and other irritants can't cross over. That's why there's so many problems with the timing of giving many of the vaccines, because there are definite windows when kids tend to be predisposed to having issues with receiving the vaccinations and then the onset of things like autism. So this Food Matters clip, I'm going to skip this here for the sake of time, but one of the things that they say in there is, great lady, she's a naturopath. She says, food, air, and water, all things that we need to survive, and we've gone and polluted them all. And this is something you have to really grasp, that it's just chemical toxicities everywhere in ways and levels that we've never seen before. And so we're going to talk a lot about this mental emotional stress here, because it's such a significant portion of why we see so many babies coming in heavily wired towards stress. And if you look at many moms that are coming into our offices these days, right? We see moms many times because they've got children that are coming in with colic or reflux issues, and they're stressed out because their baby is just crying nonstop or refluxing nonstop, and they're unhappy. And many people want to think, well, maybe it's a food allergy, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. And I understand that, but you have to understand that if what the pregnancy was like was stressful, right? Then the baby gets wired into stress early. And pregnancies these days are very stressful, right? I mean, we're being told about 1 million tests having to be performed, interventions. I have moms coming in all the time that are telling me that, I had this test on, and, there might be something wrong with the baby, and then they go and do the retest, and it was a false positive, and baby was perfectly normal. Or they go in and they have their late-term ultrasound, and they're being told, oh my gosh, this baby's going to be huge. I mean, you're tiny, and it looks like you're going to have like a 14-pound baby, and then the baby's actually born, and the baby was like 7 pounds. And so, mom is fired up because she's thinking, oh my gosh, I want this perfect baby and a natural birth. And of course, all of a sudden now they're stressed out because they think, boy, I'm not going to be able to go and do this natural delivery. And so they're living in stress mode. And of course, we have epidemics of emergency deliveries and, NICU stays for babies immediately after. And the C-section rate too is something you want to talk about too, because that is a stressor for everyone, because moms are trying to avoid it, but is such a significant contributing factor to the onset of the physical beginning of a lot of the perfect storm. Moving even a little bit further on, right? When you start looking at pace of life, like we talked about, those are big issues. And kids getting labeled. And you may not think about it, but if your child starts to associate themselves with having a label and thinking that they're broken, what does that do to a child's psyche? I have little kids that come in here all the time, 4 or 5 years old, that they've already been given a diagnosis, and they are associating who they are with their diagnosis. I don't understand how a child becomes a diagnosis. It is something that they may be given a title to some things aren't working, but these kids aren't broken. These are kids that things aren't working right, and we need to figure out why they're not working right. So this has become our new normal. The perfect storm is what kids and moms and dads are living with every day. We've got the fear-based pregnancy, the birth injury, the subluxation, the colic, the poor sleep, difficulty nursing. And of course, every time difficulty nursing happens, kids are being given formula. Moms and dads, in case you don't know this, first ingredient in the vast majority of your formulas is corn syrup. Everyone knows that's not good for you, right? Causes gut inflammation. I have babies that are coming in with significant reflux that were told that mom was allergic to, or the baby was allergic to mom's milk, and they're put on formula, and guess what the baby develops soon after? A fructose allergy. Because now you've got a child who was having trouble nursing as it was, but they never got to the cause. They're throwing Band-Aids at it to try and fix this issue, but it's not the fix. There's underlying stressors that are going on within your child that haven't been discovered yet by you or by the providers that are working with you. And of course, then we start seeing kids with chronic ear infections. And of course, what's the solution to every ear infection? An antibiotic. And of course, kids are getting, anywhere between 40 and 54 vaccines by the time that they're of school age, toxic food environment. And of course, we see the diseases, right? The labels, autism, ADHD, sensory processing disorder, and so on. So for those of you who are familiar with chiropractic, you're probably wondering, why in the heck is a chiropractor saying they can help my child? Well, first and foremost, we need to change mindset. Chiropractic is not about sore backs. Don't get me wrong. If you got a sore back, it'll make you feel a lot better, but it's the very least of what we do. This quote here is fantastic. It says, the function of the nervous system is to perceive the environment and coordinate the behavior of all other cells. For those of you who aren't familiar with this Dr. Lipton, he is a PhD in biology, but he is also one of the fathers of a term many of you have heard now called epigenetics. And it means that gene expression occurs not because of the genes that you have present, but because of the environment that the genes are being bathed in. And it's not just the chemicals that you're taking in, it's the pool of things that the body is going through that cause genes to trigger. So, what does that mean at a higher level? Well, we have to understand that the brain up here is the master controller, and the brain has a very specific way in which it controls the body. So you see on your left side, you see a spine diagram, and we call that the fuse box. And the reason that we call it the fuse box, because it makes it understandable that if you think of the brain above as the master controller, that's your central computer, and you come down through the spinal column, each one of those levels of the vertebra, what it does is it passes nerve roots out and back that control the communication pathways between the brain and the body. And that's every cell, every tissue, every organ. And it's a two-way conversation that is incredibly important that it works the way that it's supposed to. If it doesn't, we see changes in the way the brain is able to work with and control the body. So balance is the key. I want you to understand that. So there are two divisions that the brain uses to actively control the body on a day-to-day basis. So an infant newborn is supposed to live on the brake pedal, what we call the parasympathetic. The parasympathetic's job is rest, digest, growth, development, healing, learning. Okay? It is what gives information to the brain so it can help us with normal development. Because as the information comes in via a very important nerve called the vagus nerve, which we'll talk about here in a minute, the vagus nerve sends information to the brain, keeping it in a relaxed state so that normal growth and development occurs. When the brake pedal goes off and any of the three T's gets in, it can shift and it can change the balance so that the fight or flight system, the gas pedal, the sympathetic system starts to take over. That is a bad thing for a child for the long term, because the fight or flight system is your stress system. The job of the fight or flight system is to be on in times of acute stress, right? It's developmentally, it was, your caveman sees saber-toothed tiger chases caveman is going to go on a run to go and save his life, and caveman is going to increase his heart rate, his respiration rate. He's going to spit out adrenaline so he can run longer and faster and, if necessary, fight. He's going to put out cortisol because his body's going to try and do everything it can to go and help him to go and function in spite of, and he's going to spit out tons and tons of chemicals to get his body so it doesn't perceive pain. But during that process, it's going to suppress his immune system, it's going to suppress his digestive system, it's going to suppress all of his normal immune function because his body doesn't need all those things kicking on. All he needs to do is survive. When stressful event is over, balance is supposed to shift back. It's supposed to. The problem is that's not what's happening anymore. So let's talk about a process. I want you to understand there's a very specific algorithm that is occurring. And this algorithm is what is driving children down this pathway towards neurodevelopmental disorders. Because when we are not balanced, right, when the nervous system isn't functioning the way that it's supposed to, this whole process can go haywire and it can lead to hardwired imbalances. I'm going to use a term I want you all to remember. Nerves that wire together fire together. It is a very, very, very important concept for you to understand. There is this term in neurology called neuroplasticity. This right here is the underlying key to why this becomes such a significant issue for our children. This can become background noise to a child with ADHD, but can become disconnection in a child with autism. And when these things start to hardwire into the nervous system, the more time that it has to hardwire, the more that the brain learns it. What does that mean when I say learn it? Neuroplasticity means that the things that we put in, the things that we do, the things that we see, the things that we read, the things that we practice, the brain gets better and better and better at it, and it starts to occupy more real estate up here in our brains. So, perfect example. Very first time that you guys rode a bike. Were you good at it? I'm going to guess probably not, right? Most of us aren't very good at riding a bike the very first time they ride a bike. Second time, a little better. Fifth time, a little better. 100th time, pretty good. 1000th time, you're popping wheelies and doing whatever you want to do. What happened in between? That night, when you went to bed, you go into rest, digest, growth, development, and healing. The brain does the hard work of putting connections together so that the next time you get on your bike, it has taken all of that work that you've done at trying to practice on your bike, and it's written new pathways in the brain to refine it, to make it better for you to be able to go and perform tricks, to be able to ride faster, to produce more power, because it's using these pathways and reinforcing them, and they're getting stronger. So when you ride your bike, and the more that you do it, the better you get, the more that you can do on it. That's neuroplasticity. But what if you're a child with ADHD? And ADHD that started because birth trauma, because your fight or flight nervous system kicked on and never kicked off. What does that mean for them? When the fight or flight system kicks on, it's creating this nonstop bombardment of background noise that is preventing them from perceiving the world the way they're supposed to. And so they're getting nonstop noise in the background and disconnection with all of their thought processes, so they can't stay on task, they can't organize, they can't figure out how to go and filter the world around them. Ladies and gentlemen, for a child that has ADHD, filtration is one of their biggest issues. But guess what? It's not just filtration for kids with ADHD. They're having a hard time sorting, but these are kids whose minds are working so fast that once they can focus in, all of a sudden everything becomes crystal clear and they see things around the corner. What about a kid who's got sensory processing disorder? Well, these are kids who are having a hard time filtering out what's right, what's wrong. Their brain can't tell them what appropriate stimulation is because there's disorganization in the way they're perceiving sensation. Or what about a kid with autism? This is a kid who's perceiving the whole world and every sensation, and the sensation is coming in such a way that their brain is getting so much it has to disconnect. Makes sense, right? If you're living with a child with these issues, you know this. What about a child who's got oppositional defiant disorder? I know many of you that are watching this tonight have contacted me about your children with ODD. So these are kids that are stuck so far towards the sympathetic that that's all that they have, that's all that they live off of, and what does that put them in? Fight or flight? Well, what do they choose to do? They fight. Oppositional defiant disorder means that the place in the brain that's supposed to tell them rational decision making, keep things calm, think this through, it's not doing its job. The fight or flight centers are overriding it, and they make decisions that are based upon lower thought processes, aggression, right? We need to change that balance. When you change the balance and the brain starts going from a state of nonstop fight or flight, all of a sudden the child's brain starts to calm down, slow down. Then you start seeing that the way that they perceive the world and us, moms, dads, brothers, sisters, teachers, starts to change, because now they're getting the higher centers telling them, oh, maybe this person isn't dangerous. Maybe I shouldn't react this way to the situation. Maybe I should think this through. Maybe I should make a different thought process. Maybe I should let my higher brain that has all of that good stuff up there suppress the lower brain and have a better conversation with what is actually happening around me to make a decision about how to respond to it. So let's talk about the effect, right? We know that physical stress, chemical stress, emotional stress are all significant impactors. But let's talk about this effect side. All of these things here are what are causing the problems that we see today. So this concept dyskinesia, this is a really important one for you to understand. This subluxation, okay, this occurs when a joint becomes misaligned and fixated, no longer able to go through its proper range of motion. And so the fixation component being the more significant of the two, because the brain needs motion to charge its batteries. When it's not getting sufficient motion, the brain changes the way that it perceives the entire body beneath. We're going to dig much deeper into this, but you need to understand that this right here, this is the most significant driver of all of these processes. Because if this is the starting point, if you have that C-section baby brought in there's subluxation right from birth, then dyskinesia is there, subluxation is there, and all of a sudden now that baby's nervous system is starting to change, and the function of their nervous system is starting to change. And we're going to go through the process here so you understand it. This dyskinesia, especially in the upper part of the neck, is the place where we have the greatest concern. So if you look here in the area that's highlighted in yellow, so what you want to see is that first vertebra, the one they call the atlas, the one that supports the base of the skull, it is the single most important vertebra in the entire spine. The reason being is that that guy there has tons of these nerves we call proprioceptors. We're going to dig into that in a minute so you understand more what that is. But it is also the area where the brainstem lives, and beneath where, on the underside of the spinal cord, the brainstem there is an incredibly important communications portal between the brain and the body. Any interference to that communication totally changes the way the brain is able to communicate to the body. Background noise, because of subluxation there, is the starting process for so many of the issues that we see. And I'll tell you, I've adjusted hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of babies in my life. And I wish I could say that I see lots of kids that are coming in without the first vertebra being subluxated. In every single kid that I have that comes in that receives a diagnosis, whether it's ADHD, SPD, autism, the area that has the most significant effect in every single one of those is the first vertebra. And oftentimes starting because of either in utero constraint or forceful deliveries that caused significant torque in the upper part of the cervical spine. That area there is so important neurologically that one spot on the spinal column losing its normal range of motion causes a cascade of events that completely change the way the brain is able to go and recognize the body beneath. So for those of you who have never seen a C-section delivery, I want you to watch this. I'm going to give you a warning. This is graphic. If you look at the hand here of the OB, he is using a vacuum extractor to get this started. I want you to pay attention to this. We're going to go ahead and start the video now.
Irritated. Oh, there you go. Come on, buddy. There it is. Ears of a girl. Ears of a girl. Make you cute for the camera.
Now watch this. Bend. Big bend and pull. Now watch that right there. I'm gonna back that up here a little bit because I want you to see this. Look at this little girl. She is hanging by her feet. He is holding her by, holding this little one by the head. Now, moms and dads, this is happening all the time, every day. And when you think about what the starting point is for the vast majority of kids that are coming into this world, this is what most kids are coming into the world like today. So our C-section rate in this country has reached a point of where it's staying generally around between 5 and 10. 5 out of 10. So the WHO stat worldwide says that the necessity for C-section is 1 in 10, yet the US stays at 5 in 10 consistently. And it's likely because of our approach, because we don't teach OBs to deal with complicated births in the same way as other parts of the world. They don't teach them how to go and deliver babies that are in a breech position. So it has become very, very uncommon for kids to be able to go through normal labor delivery because of the simple fact that the people that are doing the deliveries either don't want to assume the risk or are not trained to do so anymore. But that starting point that you saw right there, where this little girl is hanging by her feet after going through that significant amount of force, that right there is where the vast majority of babies that are coming into this world, especially by C-section, but vaginal deliveries have this torque too, right? If you've ever witnessed a vaginal delivery, so you can see this kind of torque going into a baby's cervical spine, and it starts that whole process. But think about this. A baby that is being delivered by a C-section, this is straight resistance. There is no muscular contraction from the uterus to the vagina to be able to go and push this baby out. There is nothing but the resistance of mom's abdomen pulling against this child, so it makes the force requirements even greater to go and get the baby out. I mean, think about it. You know, what if somebody were to come up to your beautiful child and take that beautiful little baby, grab them by the head and swing them around? What would you do? I know as a dad, if somebody did that to my child, there's no man on earth or woman on earth that could stop me from doing some damage to them. So average force applied during a normal vaginal vacuum extraction ranges between 40 and 54 pounds of axial traction. That is the equivalent of taking your baby and adding a 40 to 54 pound weight to their body, but focusing all of that weight right through their neck. During a C-section, the amount of force can peak between 60 and 120 pounds of axial traction. Think about that. 120 pounds of axial traction on a 7 or 8 pound baby. That's massive amounts of force. And think about the damage that can do to their very, very fragile nervous systems. So the real pandemic. So back in the 80s, there was a research study that was done by Gottfried Gutmann over in Germany. And what he found is that spinal injury was present in 80% of the infants that he examined shortly after birth. And this was causing interference to neurologic and immune function. So think about it. The two most important systems for their body, neurologic and immune, were already interfered with because nervous system controls immune system. The immune system is not an independent system. It should be renamed the neuroimmune system. They have found conclusively in several major neurological and immune studies that the brain is the direct controller of all immune function. He concluded that observations of motor development and manual control of the occipito-atlantoaxial joint, so base of the skull, first vertebra, second vertebra complex, should be obligatory after every difficult birth, right? So every C-section, every vacuum extraction, every forceps. He also said, furthermore, this occipito-atlantoaxial joint complex should be examined and, if required, specifically adjusted, as the success of adjustment overshadows every other type of treatment. So think about that. You have an MD who is saying back in the 80s, right, when C-section deliveries were not nearly as prevalent as what they are now, that children were being born with these epidemic levels back then, and that it could have significant sequelae for all of these children's neurological and immune development. And this happened 30 years ago. So this is something that the awareness of this needs to be raised. And moms and dads, if you have friends that are about to go through labor and delivery, make sure that you're talking with them about this. Have this conversation, because the only way that we can get in front of this whole process is making moms educated about the importance of trying all things necessary to go and have a natural delivery. And if that is not possible for whatever reason, that they go through and get their children checked, because it is such a significant piece of starting their life with healthy function right from day one. So let's talk about a cycle. I want you to understand the way that this whole process works. So I'm going to go and bring this all up here for you. So there is a significant process, right? We have that dyskinesia, which you've talked about, and that's that loss of vertebral motion. It leads to this process called disafferentation. Disafferentation literally means the loss of normal input from the spinal cord and spine. When that occurs, there is a shift, a significant shift that occurs. And so that shift leads to the child's autonomic nervous system now becoming shaded, imbalanced, off towards the side of the sympathetic system. When the child isn't getting feedback from proprioception, right, which is our position sense, then their nervous system turns on the sympathetic system, and the sympathetic system hits the gas pedal to all of their functions, things like their heart rate, things like their immune system, suppressing the function of that in particular, leading to more and more imbalance over time the longer that it's there. Some kids, it's going to be problems with ear infections. Some kids, it's going to be constipation. Some kids, it's ADHD. Some kids, it's ODD. Every kid's going to express differently. But what we know is that nerves that wire together fire together. And the more time that these nerves have to go and wire down this pathway, the more time that it's going to take for the child's nervous system to calm, to regain balance. Because we know that the next thing that occurs is dyskinesis. Dyskinesis is where you start to see symptoms. Dyskinesis is garbage in equals garbage out. If the information that's coming in via the spinal cord and spinal nerves up the cord to the brain is coming in incorrectly, right? The brain's not getting the right messages, then garbage out is what we see. That is the loss of attention, problems with sensory input, because the subluxation for an infant is the first problem with sensory processing. They're not getting normal feedback from their sensory system telling them about the world around them. It causes their nervous system to become progressively more stressed, leading down the road of neurodevelopmental disorders. And so this eventually leads to disconnection. And disconnection can be ADHD, ADD, sensory processing, autism, asthma, ear infections, allergies, bedwetting, etc. Whatever you want to label it as. When the nervous system isn't functioning optimally, based upon how severely the nervous system was stressed, coming into the world determines where they're going to land on that quote-unquote spectrum. And I'm not talking just autism, I'm talking neurodevelopmental. How the nervous system is stressed changes the way they're going to perceive the world around them. And so dyskinesia leads to disafferentation. We talked about this, right? And so we know the basic senses, right? Sight, hearing, taste, smell, things like that. But what we don't oftentimes discuss are our movement senses and our balance and coordination senses. And so movement sense is based upon the concept of what's called proprioception. And proprioception is where we are in space. And so for those of you who've never heard this term before, right, let's give some kind of credence to what this really is, right? Proprioception is there are nerves that are in our joints and around our muscles that tell us where we are in space. And their job is if I don't see my hand out here because my eyes are closed, now I'm wiggling my finger, I don't see it, but I know it's still moving. And that position sense also allows me to track my finger to my nose, even though I didn't see it. It's the reason that you know that you're holding your head up and can turn your head and know where you are in space and not fall over. Because that position sense is giving you awareness of where you are. The balance and coordination sense through what's called your vestibular system also is really important. You need these two systems to function optimally for our brains to get the information necessary for us to stay in a calm state. If the equation changes and we lose proprioception, then the counterpart to proprioception is this stuff called nociception. And that starts the process of firing up the fight or flight nervous system. And that can begin to bombard the brain and bathe it in stress and change that needle so that the fight or flight system becomes chronically on. So for those of you who've never heard of sensory processing, or if you have a child that's living with sensory processing disorder, this hopefully will help you to understand in more depth what it is, but you need to go and look at the diagrams on here so you have a better understanding of what it really is, what it means, and how a child's brain needs proprioception to develop normally.
Some kids are really bouncy and can't sit still. Some kids aren't very coordinated. Some see food as a pile of toxic goo that hurts their mouth and jangles their taste buds. School might be a mysterious place where things don't make much sense. If this sounds like you may have sensory processing disorder, and we're going to explain it here. Your body has 7 senses: vision in your eyes, hearing in your ears, touch in your skin, taste in your mouth, and smell in your nose. And you have 2 movement senses: your muscles and your sense of balance. In sensory processing disorder, these senses don't communicate right with your brain. Think of the nerves connecting your brain and senses as a set of roads. Those roads should be smooth superhighways so that the senses and brain can communicate fast. If you have sensory processing disorder, then some of your roads are bumpy and rough. You can also think of the senses as having a broken volume control. If the volume is too high, you will feel your senses too strongly. If the volume is too low, you won't feel sensation at all. In fact, you'll want more. Some kids overcome these problems as they grow older. Others need help. Help is usually occupational therapy, and it's fun. Occupational therapy helps build up the connections between your senses and your brain. The more you do, the stronger and smoother they get, kind of like paving those roads.
So I'm going to back that up for a second here because I want you to look at what she was just talking about on here. So this is exactly what we are talking about when we talk about the way the brain is communicating to the body. I've treated tons of kids with sensory processing issues, and it's a very important concept to understand that this is exactly what the brain is dealing with every single second of the day. There is really improper connections that started because the brain is not getting that feedback via the proprioceptive system the way they need to. That's what they talked about. And that's why I mentioned this so much, because that's where the brain will start to change, is when proprioception is coming in, calming the brain, allowing the brain to go and perceive the world the way that they're supposed to. That is one of the most important concepts you need to take from this. So let's talk about this, right? So we talked about that concept of the roadblock. And this area here on the brain is really the place that you have to consider being the most significant area of problems with communication, because that's why I was talking about the first vertebra being the biggest area for blocking communication between the brain and the body. And so let's talk about why that would be. Because when you look at the proprioceptive system and the role of proprioception in the spine, so neurological stimulation from movement charges the brain's batteries, right? It gives the brain a constant sense of what's going on with the world below, so the brain can decide how to go and react to it. Over half of the neurons in the spinal cord are actually there for this proprioceptive function. Interestingly, 60% of the proprioceptive input in the entire body comes from the spine. 1/3 of that comes right from the base of the neck, where we were talking about C0, which is the occiput, C1, which is the atlas, C2, which is what's called the axis. And so that complex is loaded with those nerve fibers. Loss of that feedback is a significant issue. I think you can see that. And think about the way that the nervous system works, right? Anytime the brain puts a lot of attention to an area, a lot of neurological tissue, it's really important. If you blow the main breaker, right, lose proprioception in the upper part of the neck, it changes that balance right away and significantly. And so losing 1/3 of the proprioception from your entire body is a massive stressor to the brain. And let's talk about what this means. So we know that subluxations alter input, right? Misalignment, fixation leads to stress, but how? So there's actually this concept in neurology called the gate theory. When we lose that sense of motion, right, because of subluxation, it leads to decreased proprioception, increased nociception. Neuroplasticity can then lead to the brain wiring hardcore and permanently into fight or flight. And so this then leads to the next D, which is dysautonomia. Dysautonomia is a state of imbalance or dysfunction of the autonomic nervous system. So the autonomic nervous system is what we talked about, where the brain above controls the body from the parasympathetic system and the sympathetic system. Fight or flight response should only occur really and truly when there's a stressor, right? The parasympathetic system should be on the rest of the time, controlling our organs, glands, cells, blood vessels, immune system, digestive system, and our endocrine system. It should be in control at all times. So there is a significant piece of this that we need to understand. The brain uses a nerve that's called the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is really important because the vagus nerve is both output and input. When the vagus nerve lies just in front of the spine and it gets information into it by motion. If the vagus nerve is not getting this information the way that it's supposed to, it causes background noise to the brain. And the more significant the background noise is, the less function that nerve is going to have. And so let's get into that, what that means, right? So the brain's output control for all normal healing function goes to the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve's job is to then also perceive the environment and coordinate the function of all other cells by sending signals from the body about the state of every tissue that it touches, about its health, well-being, what's needed to be done to go and maintain it. It sends the signals up, and the brain is supposed to decide what needs to be done to go and send out the output signals. If that is interfered with in even a little bit, then it's going to change the way that the body's able to function in this world. So this is that concept, the gas pedal versus the brake pedal. If we wire towards the gas pedal, then the stress system will really take over and change the way that a child is able to go and function in the environment. And so the neurology of stress, I'm going to spend only a second on this because we've talked about this quite a bit. But there is a whole process that we know that the body goes through, and it changes the way that everything works, right? And so for those of you moms and dads, let's talk about how you experience stress, right? If you've had a pain condition, right, it's the inability to sleep, focus, relax, calm down. It messes with the way that we are able to function on a day-to-day basis when we're in pain. But let's talk about stress. Stress has a huge impact on us, right? It changes our ability to go to the bathroom. It changes our ability to stay well. It causes our adrenal glands to pump out stress hormones like crazy, right? And stress hormones are going to drive us during the day, and then we're going to crash the second that we sit down and our responsibilities are over because we've got no energy reserves left. And we're going to be sick more than what we should because the brain is no longer able to keep the immune system functioning the way that it should. And so when the brain starts to get wired like this, it literally changes the hardwiring so that the fight or flight system is really, really easy to kick on, really, really hard to kick off. And the longer that it wires like this, the harder it is to get it to change from fight or flight to rest and digest, right? Because once the gas pedal's on, it doesn't want to shut off. So we have to influence it to shut off. That's what we have to consider how this is going to work. Because what that does is when the brain is stuck in stress mode, it inhibits normal development through this area of the brain on here that you see called the prefrontal cortex. And it controls all cognition, right? It controls executive function, decision-making, moderating social behavior, personality expression, you name it. We're going to dig a little bit deeper on this here in a second, but you need to know that this is a really, really significant piece of this equation. And this is where we have to intervene by changing the way that the brain works to get the parasympathetic system more involved to slow the child's brain. We're going to skip that because I think that for time's sake, we've talked about that enough. And so Dr. Lipton's quote, "You can't be in growth and protection at the same time." This thing is huge. A child is supposed to be in growth, not living in protection. A child should really only be in stress mode when they've got a dirty diaper or when it's time to feed or when they're scared by something. It shouldn't be something that is just a nonstop thing that they're living in. But if you're on this webinar, it's because you're living with this every day and your child is stuck here. And our job is to figure out why and then figure out how to get rid of that. What you live with, we talked about, is that dyskinesis, right? Errors in energy output and organization. The brain is no longer organized the way that it should be. The cool part about it is, though, is that in the vast majority of children, this is reversible. It's defined as a reversible physiological state consisting of unnoticed, misdirected neurophysiological reactions to various agents, environmental, bodily sensations, emotions, and thoughts, and the repercussions of these reactions throughout the organism. So this is what we see with the kids: ADHD, sensory processing, ODD, you name it. And so how do we understand what these kids are going through? Well, so one of the things that we have to do is we have to have a way to quantify what a child is going through. So when we look at children, we use a technology that allows us to assess the function of their nervous system so that we can see how far their nervous system has gone down one pathway or another. And so we use classifications not because we like to, but because it helps us to make sense. And so we talk about raging bull kids. And raging bull kids are the ADHD kids and the anxiety kids. These are the kids that are stuck on the gas pedal at all times. And you can really and truly, in most cases, put in there the ODD kids as well, because they do tend to have a lot of commonalities with kids that are raging bull kids. The cool thing about kids that are raging bull is that when their brain starts to slow down, all of a sudden everything comes into focus. And their brain is able to start seeing things they've never seen before, not because it wasn't there, but because now they can focus on it. They can complete tasks. The brain's not going a million miles a minute because they're filtering for the first time, instead of having the brain being bombarded by 4 million different things, which is pulling their focus, because they're not feeling the tag on their shirt, not hearing the kid tapping his pencil across the aisle from him, not hearing the birds chirping outside. He's able to go and focus in, which is what his brain is designed to do, is to filter. The second kid is the drunken bull kid. And this is a brain that is disorganized and disconnected. And we tend to see this with kids that are expressing things like sensory processing disorder, balance and motor control issues, because if there's not proper connection within their brain, then they can't organize how to function in the world. So these are the kids that we tend to see that, in addition to having sensory processing problems, also tend to have really poor motor control, really poor posture, very flexed, really weak cores, really sensory-seeking kids. And if you have a sensory child, exactly what I mean. Whereas your ADHD kid is the kid who generally tends to be very rigid, right? So a lot of muscle tone, always very erect. Body is very stiff. They tend to have the posture that is always kind of on guard, right? Which matches fight or flight. And then the drunken raging bull kid is the kid that is both stuck on and disorganized. And moms and dads, if you've got a child that's on the spectrum, this is your kid. This is the kid that is living in the nonstop state of bombardment from fight or flight, with disorganization being a side effect of the process that got them to here, right? Whether it was the MMR or whether it was a trauma, whether it was something that happened without any tangible way of us telling. We know that when a child gets to a point where they are disconnected and disorganized, We know their brain has gone so far down the road that it can't make connections where the brain isn't talking to each other through the hemispheres the way that it should organize the brain's thought processes. And this is the most significant one, but also the one that is the most rewarding when we see improvements in quality of life, because there's moms and dads we see what you suffer with, and you know, I work with kids with all of these issues, and my heart breaks for each of you that have had to go through hard times with your children. But you know, if your children is on these spectrums, the reason that we do this is because we want to let you know there is hope for a better quality of life, even if your child is dealing with the extremes like ASD or epilepsy. We have a lot of kids that we work with that have these issues that have dramatic improvements in their overall function and quality of life. So the prefrontal cortex is really important in this equation. And so here's a video that was done about some of the ways in which getting an adjustment done affects the prefrontal cortex. So why a pediatric chiropractor is talking to you about how we can influence these things, this will give you a better understanding of why and how.
The way your spine works actually changes the way your brain works. An amazing new study was conducted in 2015 in a hospital in Denmark. A group of people who had never had any chiropractic care before attended 2 sessions. One with real chiropractic care and one with sham chiropractic care. During both sessions, whole head brainwaves were recorded. The brainwave recordings, or electroencephalography, EEG for short, showed some very clear changes in the way the brain functions after the chiropractic session, and no changes happened after the sham session. The study showed a change in brain function of almost 20% on average after the chiropractic session. This study is really important because it's the 4th time this very same finding has been published in reputable research journals. And this study's data is collected and analyzed by non-chiropractic scientists. This means there is no doubt that adjusting the spine changes the way your brain operates. Because the Danish scientists recorded the brain waves, or EEG, over the whole head from 64 individual electrodes, they could also work out exactly where the changes in function were happening after the chiropractic session. They were able to show that the changes were most likely taking place in an area of the brain called the prefrontal cortex. This part of your brain is a little bit like the conductor of the brain, making all the other parts of your brain cooperate together in perfect harmony. The prefrontal cortex is the area of the brain where your executive functions take place. This means it's very important for our everyday behavior. It's the part of the brain needed for us to be able to carry out all goal-directed tasks: decision-making, memory and attention, intelligence, processing of pain and emotional responses to it, autonomic function, movement control, eye movements, and spatial awareness.
Now, real quick, so all of the things that we've talked about tonight, you see many of these being addressed right through here because of the way that the prefrontal cortex directly controls, organizes, and processes information. So think about the significance of what an adjustment does and the way that this changes the brain's function, whether it's a child with ADHD or a baby that is dealing with issues like colic.
Therefore, demonstrating that chiropractic care changes function of the prefrontal cortex could explain many previous research results that have been documented with chiropractic care, such as improvements in sensorimotor function relevant to falls prevention in the elderly, a better joint position sense in both the upper limb and the lower limb, also improved muscle strength in several lower limb muscles, better pelvic floor muscle control, and better ability to carry out mental rotations of objects in space. Being able to accurately perceive where you are and where your arms and legs are is very, very important. You need to know where you are to be able to move without having accidents. And it's also very important to be able to accurately perceive the world around you. This is a vital skill we need all day, every day. To recognize some objects, you may need to mentally rotate them. For example, to recognize the letter P versus the letter B, if they're not upright, you would need to mentally rotate them in your mind to figure out which letter it was. We all mentally rotate shapes and objects that we see, but we may not often think about that we do it, or how important it is for our daily life. Chiropractors have long observed a wide variety of changes in people under their care following adjustments.
All right, so I think that illustrates the point that I was trying to make here quite well about the way that an adjustment directly impacts this very, very important area directly. And why does this matter? Being able to stimulate the prefrontal cortex via an adjustment gives us a window to go and directly change the function of a brain that nothing else can literally do, right? And let's kind of talk about integration of different things, right? Many of you are doing other types of therapies, and I'm a big fan of doing things like OT and PT and speech language pathology, ABA, neurofeedback, all of those things. Because when you add the combination of the chiropractic to those other therapies, it enhances the results. And how and why? Well, because there are things that they can't modify that we have the ability to modify, right? If we know that subluxation is the primary cause of the vast majority of the disconnection issues, right, between the brain and the body that's excited their nervous system, and we're able to influence that by mechanically and neuromechanically changing the way their brain works by adjusting them on a regular basis, right, on a schedule that's appropriate to what they need for their particular set of issues, then we can influence the brain to calm, and their result with their other therapies will get better because now the other therapist has a brain that's more receptive to the type of treatments that they're doing. And, you know, if you look on even things like our Facebook page and whatnot, you'll see testimonials from moms who talked about kids with autism. You'll see moms who've talked about kids with speech and language pathology issues, where they've, you know, been with SLPs and they saw tremendous improvements in their outcomes once they started getting adjusted, or kids with sensory issues who had major improvements once the combination of the therapies was put together. Because, you know, in kids like this little guy Evan here who we're about to talk about, you know, understanding that once the brain's gotten to a point of disconnection, allowing it to reconnect is the single most important thing that we can do. But there's certain things that therapies can't do that only an adjustment can do. And I'm going to give you a quick example here with Evan. I want you to watch this little guy so you can get an understanding as to what was going on with him to start.
Bye, Aunt Kristen. See you later. Oh, no?
The characteristic whine.
Did you have fun?
Look at his eye. He's got a big bruise over his eye because his balance and coordination was terrible, always falling.
Yes.
Is he looking, connecting, and integrating with mom?
Say yes. Yeah.
Is he connected? Mm-mm.
What? Bye, Aunt Kristen.
That's a little guy who was struggling to connect with his world because his little brain was going 4 million miles an hour because he couldn't put all the information together that was coming in, and he perceived everything in the world as stress. So this is where he started. I think the picture says more than enough. He was typical baby with intervention, C-section, all the stressors in the world coming in, and that is where he started. So just think about the amount of stress the labor and delivery caused. Think about the stress that being in the NICU like this has caused, what his little body, what his little brain was going through when he should have been nuzzling on mom's breast, breastfeeding, getting skin-to-skin contact. This is his experience as he entered the world. And so his little nervous system wired into fight or flight to the maximum degree right away because his little nervous system never saw what it was like to come into the parasympathetic side, because now he had the neuromechanical system, right, which is spine, spinal cord, spinal column, were significantly affected because of the birth process, and then stress right away because of the way that he was brought into the world. But this isn't the only way, right? It's the kids who were under tremendous amounts of stress in utero who come out. Birth process is maybe somewhat uneventful, but there were tons of stress in utero, and all of a sudden the child is crying like crazy or colicky or spitting up, or they get a little bit older and they're having problems with ear infections because they've got a low functioning immune system and the body's not draining the way that it should, and they're having problems in school with connection and focus and attention. And many times, doesn't have to have this severe of a start, but this start here drove Evan down that road. So autism, the 5 Ds. So this is Evan's initial set of scans when he came in. He was mostly nonverbal, only had 3 to 5 words. He was unable to follow directions, no eye contact perception, very emotional, very disruptive, horrible sleeper, had terrible interaction with his parents and siblings, and he was diagnosed in July of 2011. And he started care at the office that day. So this scan here is his rolling thermal scan. So when you look at the rolling thermal scan, what you see is a lot of disorganization. And so when we talk about dysautonomia, this is how we measure dysautonomia in a little boy of 3 years old. And so his nervous system is in a place where it's not connecting well, it's not calmed, it's not communicating. Everything in his nervous system is working way harder than what it should, trying to make connection, but everything is dysfunctional. So this is Evan after just 2 months of care.
What's that one? What is it?
Now look at the differences you see in this little guy, right?
Dog.
Connected, talking, vocabulary is tremendously better. So, and of course, Dad is the one who's taking the Play-Doh so he can play with it all by himself.
Fast truck.
Look at how much he's changed in just 2 months. Now let's take a look at his next set of scans. So his second and third set of scans here, each one about a month apart, what you see on his scans is a significant change from the initial set of scans that we saw here with all of the disorganization, and we start to see organization coming in, right? This isn't perfect, it's not calm, but what we see is that his brain is connecting, right? His brain is making reconnection to his internal organs, his glands, so we can begin the process of healing. Now, as you look down, what we see is that the entire upper region here has calmed significantly. Now all of the focus is down here in his GI and his immune system, trying to bring those back online, because we know that the vast majority of immune function lives in the gut. And what is one of the biggest things that kids with autism deal with? Significant gut-brain issues, right? Constipation, problems with going to the bathroom, problems with immune function. Big changes. And so after 2 weeks, so let's just kind of talk about this, right? After his first adjustment, he fell asleep in the parking lot and slept from 4 p.m. until 7 a.m. He began talking more within days, imitating speech for the first time, playing with his brother and sister and imitating their play, doing funny things purposely to engage, pooped a ton, because guess what kids have to do? Detox. He was holding on to tons of poop, and poop is toxic, so he needed to get it out, and his brain knew it, and his body started to clear that stuff out because it had to. Developed a fever, because his immune system wasn't functioning well, because of the fact that he had such a shift in his sympathetics, and he'd had the vaccinations, and his immune system had shifted towards what they call a Th2 imbalance, which means that his long-term immune system was on and his short-term immune system was completely off, so he had to clean house. After 2 months, he began speaking full sentences, exploding with development in speech, sleeping better, behaving better, potty trained, hardly ever sick, and nearly back on track. Still had connection to make, but he was making good progress towards his goals. After 10 months, this is that little guy. Watch this.
Hey, smiley boy. What do you have?
Hi, my name is Evan.
Yeah, your name's Evan. And how old are you going to be, Evan?
4.
When are you going to be 4?
On July 17th.
Oh, yay. What do you have on your face?
I have nipples.
You have dimples.
I have nipples. I know how to use them.
Cutest little guy ever, isn't he? I've watched it a million times, and every time I see it, I can't help but let my heart melt. So ladies and gentlemen, if you're watching this, I know that through your mind, you must be wondering, is this something that can help my child? is my child a candidate? Can my child benefit from having this type of neurologically based pediatric chiropractic care? Well, the answer to that simple question is possibly. The most important thing that you can do is get the information, find out, go in, get your child scanned, have an exam done, because the only way that you can get the information necessary to find out if this is something that can benefit your child is to take the first step, get your child in, get the examination performed, get the scans performed, so that a doctor who is trained to go and work very specifically with children with neurodevelopmental disorders like myself can go through and help you to understand if they can help your child. So if you are in the Cleveland area and you're wondering if this is something that we can help you with, I would encourage you to go to our website, elitehealthandwellness.net, and you can contact us through there either via email and request an appointment, or you can call the front office, and our front office number is 440-230-2300. If you're not in the Cleveland area and you would like to find out if your child would benefit from this, I would encourage you to visit the website beneath, which is the nwf.org. The National Wellness Foundation, you've seen their logo on all of my slides. The National Wellness Foundation is a nonprofit that sponsors many doctors like myself to go and outreach and teach folks just like you about how children can have a much better quality of life, live in this world in a way that doesn't seem possible right now. So it is a directory. What I would tell you is if you have a child that is in need of some solutions, I would encourage you to go to that directory, but you have to make sure that you check pediatric chiropractor. If you cannot find a doctor in your area, then you can reach out to me via Facebook or via email, and I will help you to go and find someone personally. But ladies and gentlemen, I hope this was helpful. I hope that this gives you some solutions and some hope to understand that there are resources out there that can help your child. So I thank you very much for attending tonight's workshop, and please let me know if I can help you in any way. God bless you all.